And then along came the Arrowsmith program and cognitive intervention. And of course, when I first heard about cognitive intervention in the Arrowsmith program, I thought it was hogwash. I thought it was witchcraft, because as in the paradigm, the brain was fixed. I had told children that. I had told parents that. The brain was fixed, you'll have this for the rest of your life. I went to conferences where everyone told each other that. And we felt good that we believed that, because that was our dogma, that was our understanding. So when someone with the paradigm shifting idea came forward and presented itself with a new way of looking at learning disabilities, I put my hand up and said, oh, no. So why did I eventually do this? Parents. Parents are always the initiators of change. You want something for your child. You want something maybe that works. You don't know if it will work, but nothing else is working, so let's give this one a try. And that's what the parents were saying to me when I was doing these educational assessments. They said, well, I've heard about Arrowsmith program. Should I go to Toronto, fly from Vancouver, move my family, and go to Toronto? And I would say, the school's here. It's Fraser Academy, Kenneth Gordon. You don't have to do this. And there's no research that validates what she's doing. So be careful, right? They said, Howard, we really like you. You're an adorable guy. But we're going. We're moving to Toronto. And I said, oh, okay. Well, number one parent did, number two parent did, number three parents. So 3 parents moved to Toronto to do Arrowsmith. 3 years later, I didn't hear anything about this anymore. They came back and they asked for updated assessments of cognitive functioning achievement scores. And it was when that data was presented to me, when cognitive functioning changed in them, measures of memory, measures of reasoning, measures of visual motor integration, I was stunned. It was at that moment I had an aha moment, said, I'd never seen this before in my life. And this was client number 1, 2, 3. All showed changes in cognitive functioning. And knowing about the issues with learning disabilities and how important cognitive functioning is, I knew this was amazing, that if you can change the brain's ability to interact with its environment, to absorb information, to relate to its environment, you have a fundamental shift in ability and potential of that human. And I phoned her in December of 2004 and said, I got to visit your school. This is a fundamental change for me. And from there, you know what happened. As I said, 6 schools later, this is still continuing. So why are we here now? Why are we at a phase where neuroscience, neuroplasticity, brain change is being sort of talked about and listened to? And of course, it's not all easy. There are academics who do not believe in neuroplasticity, as you'll see. People who don't believe this work has value in the field of learning disabilities. It still exists today. But the field is 50 years old. It's as old as I am. I'm 49, almost 50. So I was born when the field of learning disabilities sort of started up. And who started it up? What organizations in Canada, what organizations in America started it? Who were they? Guess what? They were parents who started it up. Parents who had kids who were failing in school. In 1963 in America, in 1963 in Canada, the same year, 2 associations started, Learning Disability Association of Canada and Learning Disability Association of America. Interesting, in 1949, prior to the Learning Disability Associations, the Dyslexia International Association started in America. So the Dyslexia Association started before the Learning Disability Associations, mostly through the work of Samuel Orton, a neuropsychologist, who was fundamental in the Orton-Gillingham program with Anna Gillingham. So the dyslexia movement started about 11 years before the Learning Disability Association movement. So in 1963, the LD field started, and people started to pay attention to it. In fact, in 1969, 1970, schools for dyslexia started in the East Coast of the United States, like the Kildonan School, for example, which I was lucky enough to go to. Timing was perfect for me. In the 70s and into the 80s, we were lucky enough in the United States to have President Kennedy, who had a child, a sister who had a severe special needs issue. And so they started providing funding for special education services and research in the United States. So the university I went to, Boston University, in the 70s and 80s, their special education department was in a 16-floor tower, and every floor was special education. Now you go back to Boston University, they're in the corner of one floor. Cuts have happened. They don't get as much funding. But there was an explosion of research because of the sister of the President of the United States, President Kennedy's sister. And public laws started, meaning schools had to appropriately serve students with learning disabilities if they were going to get funding for students with learning disabilities. So laws started being initiated. In the 1990s, well, and even Fraser Academy here started in the 1980s. 1990s, you saw a greater number of kids being served and identified with learning disabilities. You also had the beginning of what we call response to intervention, or RTI. And you have to know this. This is important in terms of visionary change. How are we going to move this field forward? Response to intervention, or RTI, is really popular in school districts across North America. And it has a good purpose. What it wants to do is say, let's not worry about identifying these kids late, maybe in grade 4 or 5, 6. Let's try to have early intervention so that in kindergarten, in grade 1, kids who may have dyslexia when they're older are given the right intervention. Phonics, phonological awareness training, in kindergarten, so these kids don't grow up to have reading disabilities. Really good, really smart, and in fact in Oregon State, they're just publishing results that over 4 years since putting RTI in place, there are 4,000 less students identified with learning disabilities over a 4-year period of time. And of course, there's a lot of celebration in Oregon about that. But here's the problem with RTI, response to intervention. The people who are advocating it, the academics, the ones in research institutions, universities, do not and have limited interest in cognitive testing, understanding brain function. And the reason is they realize it's expensive, not many families can afford it, and why wait till they're in grade 3 or 4 to do this work? And they have a point. They make a valid point. Let's do it early. The problem is that many kids are staying in RTI interventions and not responding. These are called non-responders. There are often cases of severe dyslexia, severe dyscalculia, where the intervention is not enough, or the severity of the cognitive weakness is so severe, they're not responding to these interventions. And so these kids get to grade 7, and they're still not identified with learning disabilities, and they have fallen that much further behind, and no one has identified them as having a learning disability. So there's a difficulty with this response to intervention model, and we'll go through that in more detail later. What is the definition of LD? Before I go into neurology, I want to tell you the definition, because the definition, parts of it actually support neuroscience, support cognitive intervention, because this learning disability is caused by neurological weaknesses. So learning disabilities refer to a number of disorders which may affect the acquisition, organization, retention, and understanding or use of verbal and nonverbal information. These are all cognitive tasks that the brain has to perform, whether it's organizing things, memorizing things, conceptually understanding things. And students with learning disabilities, children and adults, exhibit a variety of these difficulties. Remember in that first segment, no one's talking about reading, writing, spelling, and math, are they? They're talking about cognitive functions that could affect classroom learning, employment, a marriage. Imagine if you have some of these and trying to relate to a spouse. There are going to be some major complications. Learning disabilities result from impairments in one or more processes related to perceiving, thinking, remembering, or learning. Again, they're talking about cognitive functioning. Learning disabilities are due to genetic or neurobiological factors or injury that alters brain functioning in a manner which affects one or more processes related to learning. Again, this is in the definition. It's repeating itself. Again, cognitive function, if neuroplasticity is true, and we can intervene and we can improve remembering, we can improve reasoning, why aren't those focuses in terms of how we treat children with learning disabilities? Why are we hyper-focused on reading? Learning disabilities may also involve difficulties with organization skills, social perception, social interaction, and perspective taking. The last one is what's problem with cognitive intervention. The last statement is what's problem with trying to accept neuroplasticity and brain plasticity as important for intervention methodology for children with learning disabilities. Because if learning disabilities are lifelong, we can't do anything. These cognitive weaknesses that they're talking about, perceiving, retaining, organizing, social perception, social interaction, they're lifelong. That's the stamp. So when you try to talk to professionals about an Arrowsmith program, for example, that improves the outcomes of learning disabilities, that improves cognitive functioning, if they're trained that this is a definition, they're immediately going to have a visceral reaction to the Arrowsmith program concept. And in fact, we have trained society to look at learning disabilities as wonderful. We have calendars. In fact, I was asked to be on the latest calendar, celebrating having a learning disability. Because you have it for life, you better see it as okay. You have to reframe it in a positive way. You have to take in the good of having a learning disability because it's not going to change. This is forever. And that was the paradigm, and it's still the paradigm we're in today. And that's wrong. Because it's not true anymore. Neuroplasticity and cognitive intervention, what we're seeing is learning disabilities are not lifelong sentences. We can take those cognitive weaknesses that you're seeing here in the definition and move many of them to the average range. Now, does every child respond in the same rate and change neurologically with cognitive intervention? No. We also have non-responders. There are kids in the Arrowsmith program who don't respond to intervention. And we want to understand why. And one of the driving reasons is attention. They have weak attention span. So they can't sit and do this repetitive cognitive work. They drift away, and the brain doesn't change. As you'll see, a driving force in neuroplastic change in the brain is attention. That needs to be in place, or you don't get cognitive change. We also think exercise and sleep and diet and stress have a huge impact in brain plasticity and brain change. And these are some of the things we want to study here in the research, is why are some brains more plastic than others? It's a fascinating question, and we need to find out why. But we also know, in what we've seen with over 3,000 students since 1979 that have done the Arrowsmith program, over 35 years, the majority of those kids respond positively. And their learning disabilities can move from a severe learning disability to a mild issue in terms of cognitive functioning, and in fact, may not need learning resource support for the remainder of their education. For example, one study done with the Toronto Catholic District School Board, they followed 69 students over 2 years who did Arrowsmith. An Arrowsmith program is a cognitive intervention program. Arrowsmith looks at multiple cognitive weaknesses, identifies them, and puts in a cognitive intervention program to improve things like processing speed, working memory, visual motor integration, reasoning, whatever those cognitive weaknesses are. These kids spent 2 years, half days, working on these cognitive interventions. This is in elementary schools in the Toronto Catholic District School Board, 69 kids. 2 years later, the Toronto Catholic School Board wanted to know what was the outcome. What happened after 2 years? One of their real interests is, what kind of resource support did they need after Arrowsmith? Because, hey, Arrowsmith said you improve cognitive functioning and you reduce the impact of these learning disabilities cognitively. Do they still need all the resource room support? Why are kids in resource room support now, today? Why do they go there? Well, they have these cognitive functioning weaknesses. They can't follow instructions, they can't reason fast enough, they get confused, so they need resource room support. So they have to sit in the regular ed class science, be totally baffled, go to resource room support, try to re-understand it, try to relearn it, try to get it, and if they don't get it, then the parent hires a tutor a science tutor after school to try to teach it again. Why are they doing all that? Because of cognitive functioning differences. They can't keep pace neurologically with the information. So the Toronto Catholic District School Board said, are there different outcomes? Well, prior to doing Arrowsmith, there was no student, 0% of the students had no resource room support. So everyone had resource room support. In fact, 90% of them had 4 to 8 blocks of resource room support every week. After 2 years of Arrowsmith, 69% of the students no longer needed resource room support in the Toronto Catholic District School Board. Just 2 years of cognitive intervention has that kind of influence on neurological ability, so you can sit and engage and not need extra help to understand, to process, to receive and interpret information. 2 years, half days. Unfortunately, there was a debate right after that study of whether to keep Arrowsmith there in the Toronto Catholic School Board because they had a $15 million shortfall in their budget. And usually special education comes first. So the board said, we're cutting Arrowsmith. The parents said, no, you're not. And got lawyers, filed lawsuits, and they decided to keep the Arrowsmith program in place in the Toronto Catholic District School Board. But imagine the short-sightedness of that. Imagine the savings of doing cognitive intervention early and not needing all this resource room support later. How much money are you saving in the school budget by not needing all that support? Huge dollars. But we think short-term. We think political. We think trying to keep jobs. We don't think long-term in terms of cost savings. So we know through the research we've done that we can change this idea of lifelong. And I think a better term would be learning disabilities can be improved with cognitive intervention rather than just add lifelong at all. So what does cognitive mean? Let's step back and talk about this again. So here's a variety of definitions, pick and choose which one is easier to understand, but of, relating to, or involving conscious mental activities. When I say mental, think neurological, think neural network activities. And I'll show you some animation which is pretty interesting, such as thinking, understanding, learning, and remembering. So the term, the definition, learning disabilities, you don't see the term cognitive in it. But when they're using terms like thinking, understanding, learning, remembering, that means cognition. The mental action of processing, of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. Of or pertaining to the active process of knowing, perceiving, remembering. These are all neurological processes. And so how do we measure cognition? How do we do it today? Well, we have behavioral observation. For example, I love watching people and wondering what their cognitive profile is like socially. Through all my training, I'm able to stand back at office parties, in social situations, and get a read on what people like cognitively. Do they have good social perception? Are they able to listen to what someone's saying? Are they faking it? It's really quite interesting. And what's interesting is these behaviors, these cognitive issues form personalities. We're getting referrals from psychotherapists who work with marriage, with couples, where the wife's saying, my husband doesn't listen, he doesn't understand what I'm saying, he doesn't like going out to social situations, I'm confused with him, I want to leave him, and the psychotherapist is saying, well, maybe it's a cognitive issue and we can improve these processes and the marriage will work. So in our adult centers, we're getting adults who have these cognitive issues that affects their marriage, for example. It's really fascinating where this work can go. It's just not in the field of learning disabilities. Here's an example of behavioral observation. I was down in Redmond, Washington. I don't even know where I am these days. In Redmond, Washington, and there's a group of 50 parents or so who want to start an Arrowsmith school in Redmond. And they've asked, would you be willing to start one? I'm going, no, find an existing school. But no school for children with learning disabilities wants to adopt cognitive intervention. It stuns me. So these are private schools for LD in Seattle who aren't even interested. How can you not be interested? Right? Well, I remember me. I was like that, so I understand in a way. But they don't do this, so no one else is doing it, so they beg someone else who might have the chance to do it to bring it. So I went down there and I was interviewing students for enrollment with their parents. And I haven't been in an admission meeting for about 6 years. When I first started the Eaton Arrowsmith School here at UBC, I was the admission officer, principal, everything. And I got to hear the tales of sorrow. And so for the first time in 6 years or so, the parents were telling me their kids' stories. And you know, I've been practicing mindfulness too long, so now I just start crying whenever I hear a sad story. My emotions just come out immediately. I have no block anymore. And so the parent's not crying, and I'm crying, and she's looking at me like I'm an idiot. You know, what? No one's ever cried in front of me. Well, I'm supposed to be the one crying. But anyways, at this time, there's a 14-year-old girl with both mom and dad. And the girl said, I said, what do you love to do? And she said, I love lacrosse. And I said, well, what position do you play? And she said, I play goalie. I said, why don't you play forward? Why don't you play? She says, why? I can't. In fact, I really love basketball, but there's no goalie in basketball. And I said, why are you focused on goalies? Well, and I sort of knew where it was going, and I knew where it was going, but I wanted to see if she understood. And she said, I can't follow instructions. And I don't understand what's happening when the coach is outlining these plays. I get confused. And so it's safe to be in goalie because I just sit there and wait for them to be ready. And then they come at me and try to shoot. And I said, that must be really difficult. And she started tearing up and said, yeah, I don't really want to be goalie, but that's all I can play. Because of her cognitive functioning difference. She's, her sporting career is defined by her cognitive functioning. I mean, I'd love to do an analysis of the Canuck players and their cognitive functioning. Like, Torts would be really interesting to see what he's like. But isn't it interesting, even in a work environment, like HR, in a business, what are these cognitive functions like and how do they drive us? Because they drive our personality. They drive our choices. And we always say we have strengths and weaknesses, and we've told kids with learning disabilities, pick a career where your strengths are. But many of these kids don't have many strengths cognitively. And they don't have many choices. And that's wrong. We know now we can change these cognitive capacities and give them more choices for careers and jobs. You don't have to just go with your strength anymore. That's wrong in terms of the neuroscience that's being shown. So we have behavioral observations. We do behavioral tests, so we can do IQ tests, we can do tests of cognitive ability to look at cognition. We can do achievement tests, reading, writing, spelling, and math. Each of those achievement areas requires cognitive abilities. Like reading, you can take 8 areas of the brain that are involved in reading acquisition. These are 8 cognitive functions needed for reading. And I'll show a slide of a reading brain reading out loud. And there's 6 areas of the brain activated while the child's reading out loud. Each of these are cognitive functions. If there's failure in any one of them, or weakness in any one of them, oral reading falls apart. And we need to train teachers that this is what's out there, and this is where we need to look at. Programs like Gordon-Gillingham uses a multisensory approach to try to grab a strength in that cognitive profile to see if reading can be developed in the child. The children with severe dyslexia, all 6 of those cognitive functions are weaknesses. There's nothing to grab onto. This is where, when I was a Gordon-Gillingham tutor, I thought it was a really bad one because the child was not progressing. Like Tim, who was progressing really fast. But I bet if you look at his cognitive profile for reading, he had a lot of strengths within the 6 cognitive functions. So he could grab reading. But that severe student, which we see in the Arrowsmith program, we see a lot of non-responders to achievement intervention, have multiple cognitive weaknesses related to just reading. And we can take 3 years trying to improve those functions before reading actually begins to develop. Can you imagine telling a parent that? Okay, you didn't get a lot of response from these other interventions. You're going to be with us for 3 years before you see any change. But if they didn't do a cognitive intervention program, they would be lifelong non-readers. and they exist today. And we also have social perception testing. We can see if kids can pick out emotions from different faces. And what's really interesting now is we have brain imaging, where we can see what's happening when a child is doing a cognitive function. It's called functioning MRI. So we can put a student in a brain imaging machine, ask them to do a task, and observe the neurological interactions of these neurons and how they are cognitively processing information right in the brain. And I want to show you some slides that are really interesting in the video. This is a top-down view using DTI, or diffusion tensor imaging, looking down at a human brain and looking at the neural networks that exist and communicate with each part of the brain. That's the top-down view. This is the side view. And if you follow the green network, you can see it moves all the way from the frontal lobe to the back of the brain, the occipital lobe. The frontal lobe is your executive processor. It's the cockpit of a plane. It needs to be activated to help with organizing and planning all the different other regions of the brain. So you'll see these networks, the green, that originate in the frontal lobe and go throughout the brain. And these networks are involved in cognition. They need to be functioning properly. The neurons need to synapse with other neurons and make good connections in order for that brain to do good cognitive processing, or perceiving, remembering, retaining information. These networks need to be strong. So let's look at what it sort of looks like in an animation. So again, what is cognitive intervention? What is this Arrowsmith program? What is CogMed? What is Fast Forward? What are they trying to do? They're trying to improve these cognitive functions in the human brain. They target a specific function, like memory for auditory information, and improve it through these cognitive exercises, this repetitive work. This isn't a magic pill. This isn't 4 weeks of training. For some severe learning disabilities, you can work on auditory memory training for 3 years to build this capacity. 10,000 hours of practice. This is not fast, right? It takes dedication on behalf of the family, and more importantly, dedication on behalf of the child or adult to do the program. In fact, when I walk into the schools, I feel like bowing to these kids. It's amazing what they're doing. Like grade 1, working on this stuff, trying to change their neurological profile. It's quite awesome, really. These cognitive exercises are designed to be repetitive, focus on mastery so they get harder and harder and harder, which is what you need for neuroplastic change. And we look at accuracy and speed. Why do we want accuracy and speed? We want them to be in real time. We don't want to delay. They have to be in class, they have to follow instructions and be there and get it. So you need speed and you need accuracy neurologically to be efficient in learning and in socializing. The goal to improve cognitive functioning in the brain, such as memory, reasoning, attention, planning, social perception, language processing, etc. But this is the issue. In order for us to create a new vision, we have to focus on other things. We have to broaden our horizon. As parents, as researchers, as tutors, we have to think differently. And if you do a Google search and just reading disability, you get over 55 million hits. It's been around a long time, since 1949, before the internet. So it's been around a long time. You type math disability, 11 million results. Far less attention has been paid to dyscalculia or math disabilities than reading disabilities. And that's also apparent in research today, in academia today. If you look at written expression disabilities, dysgraphia, getting thoughts on paper, only 2.2 million results, meaning even less attention is being paid to written expression. In fact, that is one of the leading disabilities beyond reading that children have, but we don't focus a lot of time on research in that area. Now, if you type neuroplasticity and learning disabilities, you get 43,000 hits, and we're number 1, which we shouldn't be, but we are because not a lot of people talk about this topic. If you type brain plasticity and learning disabilities, you get 63,000 hits, and Sharp Brains is number 1, and they focus on brain remediation intervention. It's a really good website. In fact, it's a nonprofit. They focus on what interventions are out there, what's the research saying. I really encourage you to look at sharpbrains.com. So the focus has been on reading and dyslexia, and we've done a really good job helping a lot of kids. The problem is we've created a paradigm where that's really what people talk about, only. You know, when I was doing assessments, psych ed assessments, that was the only intervention available in BC, was a tutor for reading and spelling and writing. You know, there wasn't anything else. And so almost all my recommendations included an Orton Gillingham tutor, because that's it. And then the rest were accommodations, like extra time on tests, laptop, scribes, foreign language exemptions, anything to bypass their cognitive weakness, because I had no answer for anything. So when I came across Arrowsmith, and those families who went to Toronto and came back with these cognitive improvements, I was like, wow, if this really is true, and this happened in front of me, what a life-changing thing to have in Vancouver, in BC. That's when I flew and said, we got to do this here. Everyone's going to be excited. Everyone's going to be so overwhelmed with this. And of course, when I announced it, I was against the paradigm. I was against what Fraser Academy was doing. I was against what Kenneth Gordon was doing. I was against what faculty in special ed at UBC was doing. Reading, 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 reading. And of course, I was taken off the board of different organizations for learning disabilities because I was way down, way out there in woo land, right? And that's what happens with paradigm changes. Innovation, paradigm shift, causes this fraction because we're in this groupthink, we're in this way of behaving with each other, and we lose reasoning. We go to amygdala, the emotional brain, almost like ape land. You know, this is my territory. This is my territory. You never have my territory. Right? Don't come over here. Right? You said something different. Right? We get emotional. We're so attached to what we do and how important it is that we get emotional about it. And we lose frontal lobe reasoning, and we don't even actually study and learn what they're talking about. We don't even go there. We don't even ask. We don't even visit. We don't read the books. We just say insular and protective, right? And I know it because I did it. I did it to Arrowsmith when I first heard about it. That was my reaction. But that still happens today, and it's really wrong because it's causing children to suffer. We have to change this vision. You have to say, is Howard nuts or does he make sense? I need to tell people, this guy might make some sense. Let's listen. Let's learn more and understand this. Of course, we have to look at other approaches because we do have these non-responders, kids who don't respond to reading. And I've told you why. Severity of their cognitive dysfunction. We don't have the tools to actually help them out. So what are the questions? Are we addressing the other cognitive dysfunctions related to learning disabilities? No, not in public schools, not in most schools, districts across the world. We're not. Do you consider the impact of these other cognitive dysfunctions have on classroom learning and social perception? Do we think about that? No, we don't, because they're lifelong. There's nothing you can do about it. Live with it, focus on your strengths, bypass, 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 compensate, compensate, compensate. That's the language. The field of LD, or learning disabilities, has just begun to consider cognitive intervention to improve cognitive dysfunction. In fact, and this is exciting, we're beginning to. Academics are beginning to talk about it. Since 2013, at one major conference in San Diego with learning disability professors from around the world, this one professor from Boston University and Peabody College of Vanderbilt University presented a paper called Does Cognitively Focused Instruction Improve the Academic Performance of Low-Achieving Students? And everyone, I had a friend who went there, a professor, I met with them in Portland, and they said it was amazing. This well-recognized, respected professor stood up to present this paper, and there was a hush in the crowd. A silence. What did he say? Cognitive intervention? We have to pay attention to it? There's murmur, right? But that's changed. That's a paradigm change. Because he is well known, well loved in the field. That's the good news. That's huge news for this field, that they're beginning to pay attention to what's happening. Very exciting time. Now, what are the roadblocks in order to move forward? Well, You have to believe the brain can change. Now, when you look at something like that, it just does not look as dynamic as the animation I showed you. It doesn't look like it's going to do much, and it's going to change much. But this instrument, this beautiful tool, is constantly changing. It's designed to change itself. I am changing your brain today. I am creating new synaptic memory connections that will be with you, well, if you're focused, for the rest of your life. I'm pretty lucky to have that chance. In your hippocampus, right now, you're growing new brain cells, stem cells that are moving into your cortex of your brain. New, brand new. And it's coming out of your hippocampus, forming connections, pruning itself. And if you exercise, they sustain themselves 3 times the rate in terms of survivability. So exercise if you want a sharper brain. You got to exercise. Your genes are changing in your brain, in the neurons. The genes, their expression is altering as you interact with your environment. So genetic changes are taking place. New cells are growing. New synapses are emerging through this learning and engagement process. Now, if you're a Vancouver Canuck fan and you watch them eating potato chips and you're angry all the time, you're getting regression. And that's the danger. Stress, depression, anxiety can actually destroy and destruct neural networks, neural connections. So having calmness and peacefulness in your life is so important for learning and the learning mind. And thus the importance of mindfulness practice, being calm. If you're at a heightened state of anger and anxiety all the time and worry, you're not going to be or have a very effective plastic brain. But think of the kids with learning disabilities in schools today who are trying to understand what's happening, who don't have the cognitive function to do it, who have this heightened state of stress and anxiety. Not only do they have the cognitive functioning issue, now they have the reptilian brain saying, leave. And the parents saying, go, you missed 5 days, you gotta go. And you have this stressed out brain that's actually destructive to brain development. It's a sad parallel. This is not a new idea, brain plasticity. In fact, in 1793, this Italian anatomist discovered that if cats and dogs exercise, their cerebellum is more complex than cats and dogs who don't. Michael Mersnick in the 60s, as a graduate student, tried to publish papers as a graduate student on brain changes he was seeing with monkeys he was training in terms of motor cortex development, but the journals of neuroscience wouldn't publish it because they didn't believe the brain could change itself. So neuroscience wasn't always a fan of the idea of brain change and neuroplasticity. Santiago Cajal, I'm not very good at Spanish, hope I pronounced it all right. He's considered the father of modern neuroscience. And he said this back in 1893, I believe. Every man can, if so desire, become the sculptor of his own brain. This is before neuroimaging. And what he would spend hours doing is drawing from a microscope neurons from animal and human tissue. And he believed that this brain could change itself. He's considered the father of modern neuroscience. Sharon Begley, who wrote the book Train Your Mind, Change Your Brain, science writer, Newsweek, in her book, she wrote, as the discoveries of neuroplasticity and the self-directed neuroplasticity trickle down to clinics and schools and plain old living rooms, the ability to willfully change the brain will become a central part of our lives and of our understanding of what it means to be human. Does everyone agree with neuroplasticity, that it's important in education? This fellow doesn't. And I don't pick on him. He's one of many, although it looks like I am. But he wrote this in an article in Australia. This is when Barbara Arrowsmith Young, the author of The Woman Who Changed Her Brain, the founder of the Arrowsmith program, was visiting Australia in a speaker series. And he decided to write in a publication a whole bunch of things, but this one was really interesting. This excitement around brain-based learning as if learning could occur anywhere else, and neuroplasticity is irrelevant at best, and at worst has been a major distraction without any practical meaning for educators. Is there divisive feelings about this topic? Yes. He's a reading expert. His focus has been reading his whole life. And unfortunately, it's not understood. He just doesn't see this picture. But he's a professor emeritus. School boards in Australia listen to him. He has influence. We're not going to change if this is the behavior. It's just not going to happen. So we're in this pre-neuroplastic paradigm. The brain anatomy is fixed and unchangeable. I think it's changing pretty quickly, but it's still there, as you can see. Brain is hardwired. Brain function cannot be altered with damage or limited. In fact, rehabilitation medicine for brain injury, I was in a conference in Toronto about a year ago, and I was so excited to go to this brain injury conference for traumatic brain injury, because they're all going to be in neuroplasticity mode. They're all going to understand, they've seen the videos, they've seen people shot in the head and they recover. But there was a divide there. There are people still in the paradigm of bypass and accommodation, meaning if you have a stroke and your left hand is inalterable, you should only use your right hand. They're still practicing this mind of brain is fixed. And there were other practitioners who said, no, freeze the hand that is good and train the hand that is non-functional for plastic alteration in the cortex of the brain. I was stunned. I thought I was going to the choir, that everyone's going to talk about brain plasticity and how it's benefited, especially for traumatic brain injury. But it wasn't the case. So the divide is even there. Accept the brain as is and buy the calendar that everyone is going to be famous if they have a learning disability, right? Neuroplasticity is this idea that the brain can alter itself. The neurons and the organization of these networks that you saw and their function changes with new experiences. There's so much research on this. You might have seen people who juggle. They see changes in their brain just through practicing juggling. London taxi drivers who are training to get their license have to read maps and practice how to get to certain locations. When they look at their hippocampus, which is involved in visual spatial thinking, there's tremendous neural growth, density, myelination, brain change by repetitive practice. So this is common knowledge now. It's not a myth anymore. This is solid, founded in solid science. And of course, Santiago out here in 1892 was the first who mentioned this idea. What drives neuroplasticity? Attention. It's everything. And when I read about this and I see about this, I worry about all those kids diagnosed with ADHD. That are sitting in class, daydreaming, non-engaged, and not having the benefit of brain change. And what's really fascinating, in my experience, with cognitive intervention and the Arrowsmith program, roughly 70% of kids who come to the Arrowsmith program who've been diagnosed with ADHD within 1 to 2 years are off medication. Why? Well, their ADHD was caused, and the behaviors that are associated with it were caused by cognitive functioning problems. Think about this. If you're going to be tested for ADHD, you've got to show distractibility, not paying attention, not following instructions. These are all cognitive functions too, meaning memory for information and instructions. If you can't auditorily process this information in the classroom, you're going to daydream. You're going to forget what's been said. And here we have parents being asked by teachers, I think your child has ADHD. Go to a physician. They have a cognitive functioning problem. And the medication doesn't make a difference. In fact, medication, if you look at the studies, does not improve grade performance. It improves how much a teacher likes you and whether your parent's going to kill you. But it doesn't change how well you do academically. Why? Because the cognitive function is still weak. You can't engage, you can't reason, you can't process. Right? But attention is the driving force. It's everything in what we do in life. And I want to show you now a video on neuroplasticity. It's 8 minutes. How are we doing? What time is it? Oh boy. Okay, I'm going to show this video on neuroplasticity. It's about 8 minutes. There's some technical terms, but there's some really interesting video in showing that dendrites and neurons changing and altering itself in lab studies. Really fascinating to watch. And just imagine your own brain doing that. As you think, your thoughts change your brain. Not just thinking. That's why you have obsessive thought problems, some of us. Right? You think about the same thing over and over again because you're wiring yourself to do so. But this is what's happening. It's a very interesting video. Now, There is a spot in here with there's a swear word, S-H-I-T, I hope you can handle it. But I want to prep you for it, so you're not shocked with it. So let's watch a little video on neuroplasticity. This is what we're trying to do here with changing learning disabilities and creating a new vision, bringing in cognitive intervention, neuroscience, neuroplasticity. This is why at UBC and Southern Illinois University, I'm flying down to Portland to meet with the university down there to do brain imaging on learning disabilities. I believe this work will have a fundamental change on society. Barbara Arrowsmith's work for students with learning disabilities is life-changing. It reduces human suffering. Do we get different responses with different children? Yes. We need to know why that happens. Why do some respond better than others? We see some remarkable success stories, and then we see a few stories where we go, why wasn't it as effective? But the overall effect is extremely positive, the outcomes. So this is the mission. This is the vision I have. This is why I'm here today, is to share this story. We have programs now that can focus on cognitive intervention. We need to pay attention to this. We need to move beyond the reading paradigm, the reading focus. We need academics in special ed who study cognitive intervention, not just reading. We need to open our minds to this.